Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, June 17th, 2023, and today we're going to be talking about Chris Christie's 2024 presidential election bid. Now, this is Chris Christie's second time vying for the presidency. He announced just a little bit over a week ago that he would be running for the 2024 nomination on the Republican side. He immediately went on the offense against President Donald Trump, going against his handling of the insurrection, going against his handling of the election 2020, handling his presidency, the way that he has now established himself within the Republican Party. Chris Christie largely seems to be entering into this race as a means to go against the former president. But the problem lies in the fact that Chris Christie's attacks against Donald Trump and his entrance into the race seems to be impacting everybody else besides Donald Trump. What I mean by that is looking at new data from the state of New Hampshire. Chris Christie has been gaining ground amongst voters within the state. He went from being at 0% and 1% in polling to the two most recent polls showing him in third place at 7 and 9%. These differences are very noticeable because you can start to see a trend line here against other candidates losing support and new ones gaining them. In this case, Chris Christie being the person gaining. And what you can see, again, in former polls, Chris Christie's name was never even mentioned. There were ones taken as recently as May by the same polling firm that shows Chris Christie at 7%, where he was entirely omitted because he wasn't even within consideration for any of these Republican primary voters. And that isn't to say 7% is an amazing point, but it's definitely a lot better than being at 0 or 1% compared to the recent numbers. But what we notice here is that while Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are still in the top two place, their numbers have changed since Chris Christie has entered into the race, since many people have entered into the race. One person has improved and the other has not. Ron DeSantis has been largely seen as this second place candidate to Donald Trump, someone who could finally take on the former president and challenge him and give him a run for his money. Coming off of a 20-point election victory in one of the nation's biggest swing states, Ron DeSantis had a lot to capitalize on. And you can see that back in the numbers way earlier on in this year. In early 2022, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump were, technically speaking, very close together compared to where they are today. Donald Trump at different points in time, even at low points, was sometimes just 12, 13 points away from Ron DeSantis. Within striking distance, should Ron DeSantis have announced his campaign that early on in this year. But then things started to change. Donald Trump went on the offense against Ron DeSantis, and it became clear that Donald Trump was not going to play nice. He was going to completely rail against the governor of Florida, and so far it's been working quite well. And you can see here that the numbers have started to improve, and today Donald Trump stands with a 33-point advantage against Ron DeSantis. Imagine that. From what was 13 points when Ron DeSantis wasn't even in the race is now 33 with Ron DeSantis already announcing. And it looks like that bump that he had got from his announcement brought him from 19% up to 24, but today he stands at 20. But what we were mentioning here with Chris Christie in particular is that you can start to see where this big difference starts to take hold. The New Hampshire 2024 poll that we just showed you with Ron DeSantis at 12%, Chris Christie at 7%, well, there seems to be voters shifting away from Ron DeSantis and towards candidates like Nikki Haley, like Tim Scott, like Chris Christie. And I think the reason why we see this is because though Chris Christie, again, as I said, entered into this race in an effort to get out President Donald Trump, he seems to be pushing out everybody besides President Donald Trump. The problem lies in the fact that even though all of these candidates know who their main enemy is, they're either avoiding it because they know that's not the advantageous position electorally, or, and I think this is also a case here, that there are seemingly, actually no, I think this is a combination. I'm not going to say or, I'm going to say and, Donald Trump's voters are loyal. They will not shift away from Donald Trump. And you can see this in recent polls where we have seen who will you not vote for in the 2024 nomination. Those who come up very high, Chris Christie, right? People like him, those are absolute no's. People who do not like some of these other Republicans, Mike Pence tops that list. Who will you absolutely not vote for? Mike Pence, up there in the top 3. But you know who isn't up there? Donald Trump. He fares the best out of everybody. Just 14% of Republican primary voters say they would never consider voting for Donald Trump. Chris Christie's number, on the other hand, 70 to 80%. 70 to 80% of the electorate says we don't want Christie. Just 14% says we don't want Trump. Almost everyone is open to this idea that Donald Trump will be the nominee again. And that's the problem. There isn't this concerted effort to get him out because it's all being split. It's exactly how it was back in the 2016 Republican nomination, when everybody was supposedly never Trump, and then the combination force never came together. You have Ted Cruz at 25, John Kasich at 20, and Donald Trump at 40. Combined together, yes, you would have beaten Donald Trump. But alone and separate, you absolutely would not have. And that's the problem here too. Donald Trump's base will never leave him. So what Chris Christie is fighting for is actually Ron DeSantis' voting base. What Mike Pence is fighting for is actually Ron DeSantis' voting base or Nikki Haley's voting base. They share a disgruntled part of the Republican electorate that does not want Donald Trump to be their first choice, but they can't make a decision as to who to back. So when you see Chris Christie rising in the polls, when you see Chris Christie doing better when it comes down to, okay, my ad block is going to prevent us from seeing that. But essentially what we know is that Chris Christie is going to 7%, to 9%. And when compared to the other candidates, it looks good, but you start to see where that support is coming from. And it's not coming from Donald Trump. Now, Chris Christie hasn't exactly been the kindest to Ron DeSantis. He went against the way that Ron DeSantis had, interacted with the Disney Corporation, the Disney family in the state of Florida. But what I will say is that even though maybe he is gunning for Ron DeSantis, it is clear and has been evident from the very beginning that he is on that debate stage. He wants that 1% nationwide. He needs those tens of thousands of donors across the country to get on the debate stage because he wants to go against Donald Trump. But the problem is that, yes, some voters like that. Yes, some voters are listening, but it's not Trump supporters. It is not the electorate that wants Donald Trump to thrive. It is not the electorate that wants him to be the Republican nominee for the third time in a row. And that is ultimately where this problem really, I guess, I can't speak right now. Where this problem starts for Ron DeSantis is that he doesn't have much room to grow. Because that Trump base, that 53% on average today that backs the former president is probably only going to grow because it has grown. It has grown over the past months, and really we have not seen anything like it. The thing is, when the polls were way out months ago and Donald Trump was the only major contender in the race, you could have made the argument that once campaigning starts, once the primary season officially kicks off, Donald Trump's base dwindles. We saw so many members of the right wing say Ron DeSantis is at 31% today. When he announces, he'll be at 40. When he announces, he'll be at 45. And the exact opposite happened. He announced and he lost support. Same thing with many of these other candidates. It is as if Donald Trump is winning back over the electorate in the same way he did as 2016. And what was the story that was going to be told and that we knew was going to happen from 2021 onward was that 2024 was going to shape up very similarly to how 2016 did. And here we are correct. Donald Trump is going through the same playbook because it works. These other candidates here, I think, really think that they have a viable shot towards the presidency. And in many people's eyes, they do. They have supporters. There is still about 1 in 20 voters on the Republican side preference Mike Pence first. 1 in 5 voters on the Republican side preference Ron DeSantis first. When you see these numbers, they are encouraging. But what you see is really just a fractured electorate. What you look at from the outside, from our perspective, is a very clear-cut path as to how Donald Trump wins the nomination. When you see polls that show Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie, Donald Trump all on the same ballot, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, you see, okay, there's no chance that anyone would choose all of these other candidates over Donald Trump. He's dominating the field. But head-to-head, the numbers look a lot better. Sure, Trump is still leading, but he's not at 50%. He's not the first choice in terms of 50% of the electorate. The majority of the Republican Party is not on his side. And that's exactly what happened in 2016. The problem, nobody wanted to drop out. Nobody wanted to shift away. They all started infighting. Attacks against Jeb Bush, attacks against Marco Rubio, attacks against Chris Christie, Ted Cruz, John Kasich. And don't get me wrong, they went after President Trump too. They went after him in 2016. I'm not going to, try to act as if that didn't happen. But regardless, Trump's base is always loyal. And the other Republican primary voters simply are not the same way. They are not attached to Ron DeSantis the way that Donald Trump supporters are attached to him. They would be fine if it was another Republican up on the ballot challenging him. And that's why you're starting to see this shift towards Chris Christie. I mean, that is what you're seeing happen here. Chris Christie is speaking directly to the people. They're liking it, sure, but it's the base that Chris Christie does not need to support him. What Chris Christie's ultimate goal, I think, by the end of this campaign, maybe he thinks he's going to win the presidency, but realistically, I think why he entered into the race was largely on purpose to try and get Donald Trump to not be the Republican nominee. I think what Republicans realized after 2016 is that if he was to come again, if he was to run again, and this was under the assumption Hillary Clinton had lost, they would need to make a consolidated effort to push out against him. But he won. And he was validated. And he was, told time and time again, you are the only Republican who could have beaten Hillary Clinton, and you did. And now you are the only Republican who is going to take on Joe Biden in the next election because your last one was rigged. That's the argumentation here. And that's the thought process that I think we need to assume is being worked under the assumption. What we are going to see is that Donald Trump's base is going to stay very strong with him, and the rest are going to just shift off. They are going to go from Pence to DeSantis to Haley to Scott to Christie. They are going to jump around. But regardless of where they go, Donald Trump holds strong. And I think what we are going to find come Iowa, come New Hampshire, come Nevada, come South Carolina, come the bigger states, that Donald Trump might not be winning the majority of the vote, but he still very much will be winning. He will be winning with a plurality victory because the voters here still preference him. He's at a majority nationwide. Statewide politics, not so much. Not in the early states, at least not yet. And that's where it seems as if he could come crumbling down. But with all of the other candidates in the race, it may not seem significant that Chris Christie's at 2%, Tim Scott's at 3%, Mike Pence is at 5%, but it matters because combined, they have a force to be reckoned with. But alone, they're all going to lose. So we will see what happens in the 2024 race for this Republican side. I think what I am expecting is that eventually there will be some major consolidation effort. We've seen news indicating that Glenn Youngkin, after the Virginia primaries, will endorse Ron DeSantis. We've seen indications now from Oklahoma, the governor there, lieutenant governor, also have endorsed Ron DeSantis for president. So there are some people trying to consolidate around one person to make it a game and a race between the two top candidates. But what we might see too is that, especially given some of these recent polls from HarrisX or Harvard Harris, is that Ron DeSantis' numbers dwindle while Donald Trump's improve. And that isn't to say that these voters are shifting away from DeSantis to Trump, because I don't think that's the case. What I think is happening here is that they're shifting away from DeSantis to other candidates, right? Mike Pence polling at the highest point he has ever done in the most recent two polls, ever, in this 2024 race, right? In New Hampshire, Chris Christie doing better than he's ever done in any of the 2024 polls now. But where is that base coming from? Not Donald Trump, but rather Ron DeSantis. There is a problem here, and I think it will be realized soon enough, but I don't think early enough that it makes enough of a difference. So I just use the word enough a lot, but we are going to see Donald Trump do quite well because the Republican Party, as of right now, at least when it comes down to this primary process, cannot seem to find a candidate to consolidate around. The only thing else that I think would be quite interesting to see is whether or not these debates make a difference. Because as we've seen with the efforts from many of these candidates is that they just want a platform to challenge Donald Trump on the national level. I don't think it'll look like 2016, at least, because they've seen it happen. Chris Christie firsthand has contributed and seen it happen. The tearing down of other candidates when there is one clear, not enemy per se, but one clear mainstream frontrunner that you should be going after to peel support away from, to delegitimize. That is what is the effort of these, candidates in a lot of these races, is to delegitimize the other ones. And what we will find is that this debate stage will be interesting. I will be watching very closely the first 2024 Republican presidential debate. It'll probably happen sometime around the fall, so look out for that. Definitely worth tuning into. Donald Trump might not participate because maybe he doesn't want to be, platformed in that way. Maybe he thinks that this nomination is entirely assured as the former president, and he might be right. He might be right, because that's what the numbers are telling us now. That's what everything is telling us right now. The endorsement game, the money game, the polling game, the volunteer game, the strategy game. I mean, Donald Trump, quite frankly, is killing this Republican primary. He is doing phenomenal. And while other candidates rally amongst themselves and try to make a name for themselves, especially people like Christie, who were major contenders who have largely long been seen as potential Republican presidents entering into this race, thinking that this is their time. We're going on 13 candidates today. 13 candidates. 2016 only had 17, and there are months to go until the end of the year. There are so many people that could enter into the race, and right now it looks as if Christie's attacks, though largely meant in an effort to take out Donald Trump, seem to only be doing damage to Ron DeSantis and other candidates that are anti-Trump, never Trump, etc. And ultimately, that's the reason why Donald Trump is still very much on track, despite plenty of other candidates announcing their candidacies for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Republican presidential primary election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.